The persona he had was ordinary man, and he put on the suit. The suit gave him his special persona. The suit allowed those unique powers to emerge, both internally and externally.
When you start to examine the realistic idea of why Bruce Wayne would dress up as a bat, the best explanation offered by the comics is the notion of him using fear against those who would use fear themselves.
He is a real person, and he's just, you know, he's trying to intimidate and frighten is part of his modus operandi.
Where are you?
Here.
From the beginning, just felt he was black. You know, just there was no question about it, not blue or dark gray or whatever.
It can be truly said that I have a bat in my belt.
Obviously, the leotard is ridiculous.
Shall we dance?
I worked on a number of projects with Bob Ringwood through the 80s. He's one of a handful of very clever costume designers in the world. He'd met Tim Burton and got the job, and then we started this, what seemed at the time, a very long prep, 24 weeks we had, without even realizing the sort of monumental task that was ahead of us of creating the Batsuit. Yeah, I guess we had all the comics, and obviously Tim and Bob, you know, from the outset, we're not going to put a guy wearing his sort of underpants over a pair of tights. We were definitely never ever going to do that look.
Bob was very keen on bringing other elements in, which helped develop it into something other than just a kind of muscle suit. We started off with a live cast of Michael, and basically sculpted the Batman elements over it, leaving all the spaces for him to bend his arms and legs, and all the joints had to be kept mobile. Once the shape worked, then we had to take moulds of it, and the moulds then had to have foam cast into them. All the pieces then had to be glued onto the undersuit and all of that, and the cowl had to be joined onto the cape, which had to be joined to his body, because the cape was very heavy.
The whole idea of making that cape just came to Bob one day. We were at lunch one day and we were sitting in a restaurant, and I think it may have even been a circular table, and it just hit him that if we used a table as a mould and sprayed that with latex, we could make a big circular cape as big as we wanted.
Worked on several different types of weights of the cape, you know, in terms of easier to flow in the breeze, more heavy to give it a weight to it, more wingspan. Just whatever we could do to give him the persona that he was trying to project.
And we did texture the latex suit, and particularly the cape, so it had a kind of bat skin texture to it. And we were experimenting then, really. You know, the latex was probably a couple of inches thick in places, so you're dealing with something that's very hot and uncomfortable to wear. It did look very strange not having the eyes made up. I'm sure we did tests, only realizing at that point that in fact it had to have a sort of seamless appearance, and making up the eyes would intensify the whole thing, make it look less like a carnival mask, I suppose.
I put on the thing and I put on the cape. I wanted to get a feel for Michael because I knew it was a weird thing for him to deal with. You couldn't hear in that thing, you know, your vision was sort of, and then it was like really heavy. I mean, you know, depending on which cape he was wearing. So I did try things on just because I did want to know what he was up against.
To take a dramatic actor and say, and by the way, we're going to cover you in latex and expect you to act, you have to care for him in a certain way, I think. So I can claim to have worn the suit simply because I wanted to be in a position to say, yes, I do know what you're talking about.
I don't know that we realized how restrictive it was going to be until we got there.
Who is this guy?
I don't know. Until we find out, keep a lid on it.
Batman certainly couldn't do a head turn because, you know, his neck was joined to his torso. In fact, the look then was probably to suggest in the comics that the cowl and cape were kind of one thing.
I think Michael's problem was he had to find a physical vocabulary to cover the inadequacies of the suit. So we have what became known, and actually has become loved by a certain sort of fan, as the Bat turn.
John Peters came to me one day and said, Warner's have this thing going with Nike. Can you use any of their sportswear? And I talked to Bob, and he said, well, 80s sportswear is not going to fit in with our 1940s look. And then it just came to us that, why don't they make the Bat boots? They made the Bat boots from scratch based on one of their cross trainers at the time. Michael and the stunt guys absolutely loved them. They had, you know, a really supportive, comfortable boot.
Michael Keaton tried to do all his own stuff, but it's hard enough normal to do that, but when you've got this almost immovable suit on, you have to be a kind of Superman to be able to move. So we had a normal stunt guy, we had a karate martial art guy, and we had a ballet dancer. And the ballet dancer was the one who did the walk-in, because this guy could swish his cape and look great, you know. And then two quite tough guys to do the fighting.
Once he was filming and looking good on camera, that was when we were happy with what we'd done.
Meow.
Costumes on these movies are always a nightmare. Michael's costume we tried to improve upon from the first movie, make it work better for him, and you know, the fans go nuts if you change anything on the costume, so we had to kind of be careful about that.
No designer just wants to just say, okay, let's bring the Batsuit out of the Bat closet, you know. It's like you're working on a movie, you gotta kind of go for it a little bit.
The first film had such a great look to it. There was no reason not to continue it.
On the second, we had the luxury of what we didn't have on the first one, which was time. And of course, we had more money because it had already established itself as a successful phenomenon.
We had an amazing team on this movie. Bob Ringwood, who had done the first film, and Mary Vogt costumes. I mean, so talented and really adept at translating Tim's drawings and his designs into reality and making them functional.
Well, we looked at Art Deco toasters and vacuum cleaners, all things which, for no apparent reason, were aerodynamically designed, and tried to incorporate that feel of them. I mean, we got lots of photographs that we blew up and had around all the sculptors when they were sculpting, and it just the fact that the photographs it somehow translated itself into the things that they were sculpting.
Tim's thinking was to really make the Batsuit a lot sharper and a lot slicker. Tim, I know, was quite keen for it to look like an Oscar, to have that kind of feel to it.
There was already a full-size prototype that was sculpted. It was a little rough, but it was a completely new approach. Whereas in the first movie, Batman had very much human anatomy on his armor. This new one was more sort of Art Deco-y, very hard mechanical lines and plating. So that was already pre-established before I came on, and my job was just basically to sculpt like the actual suit for Michael Keaton.
He had done it perfectly. It looked exactly like something you would have made at Ferrari. It looked like, you know, a car designer had done it. And it was like, oh, he says, is that okay? You go, yeah, that's kind of exactly.
We start with a fiberglass body cast and then sculpting clay over the top of that, which will then make the foam latex suit. So everything that's in clay will be eventually in foam latex.
They take the sculpt, they mold it, and then they generate a fiberglass copy of it, and they go in there and they resand it and they polish everything up really beautifully, and then they remold that again, and then all the pieces were generated from that. So you get a nice smooth car finish. It's a very, very dense foam rubber, and they put a lot of black tint inside of it, so when you finally run the suit, it comes out one solid color, and then they take that and they sew it onto the spandex suits and in sections. They have to make like 30 suits, because when it gets scuffed up, you're done, next suit. But with something that's smooth and clean, it has to look pristine all the time. It's very difficult to maintain, so you just keep going through them.
I think what we did on Batman Returns is beautiful. I think it's a lovely piece of sculpture. And if it looks like a piece of sculpture, then I think that means it's worked pretty well.
You missed.
I
think at one point there were 146 people just in the costume department that were making all kinds of different things, you know. You would throw an idea out there, throw a concept out to these people, and you would get any number of different ways that you could have what you want thrown back at you, which is, you know, really unheard of anymore.
Bob Ringwood is the best designer to work for. He is incredibly creative. He knows how to pick people who know how to do what they do, and he gives them an idea, says, this is what I want. He gives you a really specific illustration that you know exactly what the costume is supposed to look like, and he comes and talks to you, and then he goes away and lets you do it.
I really wish that my kids would have been around when we were making it, because my nieces and nephews came to visit the set, and there was something about putting that suit on, and you know, it just made you want to, you know, be a superhero, you know, and you really you kind of bought into it. And when kids would come on the set, it was unbelievable. I mean, they would literally be speechless.
I would sort of try in the first couple of weeks when I was in the Batsuit to entertain the kids, and I'd goof around with the cape, and the kids go into a trance in front of the Batsuit. It's amazing to watch because, particularly with the boys, they just get completely entranced by this costume. They don't need any entertainment at all. So after a while, I would just stand there like I was in the Wax Museum.
When a kid meets an actor in a Batman costume, he's met Batman. It isn't an actor that's Batman. And so that's part of the thrill of it, part of the wonder of it.
I was hoping you'd drop in.
We had taken a giant leap from the Michael Keaton film, and then had built on that from the Val film to the George Clooney film. And at that point, you know, we had the same group of people that had been working on the same problem for 2.5 years.
We can design a piece that fits into here. So
well, we can certainly do scenes with and without it. On all those movies, you have the common link of the costume designer and Bob Ringwood's interpretation of the original vision, and then the development of that. And I presume Warner Brothers' concerned that there is some follow-through from one to another.
And then what we're going to do is this gets painted, then the glove comes to a line, and then we'll go to a point on the glove.
I don't think we ever had it that well worked out. I think it was just a creative process. Deals with, okay, we have this suit, now where are we going to go from here on out?
There's something about an anatomically correct rubber suit that puts fire in a girl's lips.
They wanted to basically have it feel human in a way, and yet very sort of animal in a way, if that makes any sense to you. And it was trying to come up with that sort of combination that just worked. And I think Joel loved the idea of having nipples on it, as I recall back now.
Joel Schumacher is the man who put the nipples on the Batsuit. That's what Joel Schumacher did. And it amazes me that that could have offended as many people as apparently it did.
Bob really wanted the blue-black suit on that movie. And in the beginning, we loved the blue-black because it was more like the comic where you would get the blue highlight on the black. But then we found out later that it didn't hide as many sins as the all-black suits did. You know, if they got a scratch or a cut in it, it showed. The cape attachment was a different thing. The original one, it came from here, and this one we had some machine parts milled so that the cape actually came from one place and rotated. So we hired a guy from aerospace industry to mill the pieces for us so that we could have this really sleek closure on the cape. The heads were the hardest part to run because they were a 360 thing. There was no seam in them, so those were usually, the nose was the one where we got the most air bubbles. That was the problem. And the ears, the only ears at the end of the ear would come off.
I tell you, all right, got a little wax in my ear.
When they morph into another suit, we only had about 3 weeks to produce those suits at the end of the movie. So we went back and took some of the ones from the movie before and cast the silver pieces onto those suits and then glued them on.
You ride?
Felt like I was making a toy commercial. I mean, literally. It was, all of a sudden, we were in, like, these new suits. I'm like, okay, so I'm just trying to think of the story of how this works. It's like, let's not ask questions. We've got new silver suits, okay? It's just the way it is.
When he's looking for the most intimidating symbol that he can think of, he naturally gravitates towards the thing that has frightened him the most as a child. Essentially, Bruce Wayne becomes his own worst fear. The costume has to be frightening, or it has no purpose. For it to be intimidating and imposing, it had to have a sense of function that would play into the credibility of Bruce Wayne putting on this extraordinary costume.
Theatricality and deception are powerful agents. You must become more than just a man in the mind of your opponent.
What the hell? But I wanted to combine that with a design that incorporated the more operatic, animal-like, organic qualities of the costume.
Chris wanted his legs to be more supple, and him to be able to kneel down when necessary. And he also really, more than any other thing, wanted Christian to be able to move his head more and not do the superhero movement of turning the shoulders and the head at once, you know?
The last versions of the costume had a very kind of industrial, almost kind of machine-made kind of look to it. Chris, with Lindy and Julian and Dan sculpting, were reducing it back to the human figure.
We came up with the idea that it was something like a combat outfit.
Nomex survival suit for advanced infantry.
It had a really high-tech inside, mixed with a wetsuit. That would explain why it hugged the body and looked so sort of neat and sexy, really. You actually saw the inner workings of this suit. It's kind of carbon fiber plates. It protects the core of your body from falling below a certain temperature. He goes into the workshop and decides to spray it with a latex black spray, which removes the heat signature. So if you look with night glasses, which detect body heat, this refuses to allow you to see it. And as he tinkers with it, you see how he develops it from that into the black Batsuit.
Once it was actually getting made for me, there's all sorts of interesting processes that you go through where you have to have your whole body, you know, molded.
A plaster Christian Bale is then produced out of that mold, and as soon as the concept sculpt was approved, and it's literally broken down and remolded into the different parts of the costume. And the cowl, the torso, the legs, they all have to be sculpted individually from that original one piece. Getting the foam as black as possible was a problem, as that reduces the durability. We're not painting the foam, it's kind of the foam as it is. When those molds have been injected, they're cooked in a big oven, and then they come out of those molds. They're wet. It's just a very efficient way, it's just to put it through an old Victorian housemaid's mangle just to extract the water. The piece is taken out and dried, they're then prepared for trimming. The mold doesn't produce like a cookie cutter kind of effect. There are flashings, these sort of waste areas on the edges of the foam that have to be trimmed back before it's glued down to the suit. And they're trimmed very patiently by our wonderful girls in art trimming. The cowl itself is very expressive. This man's angst really shows through on the sculpt. Rather than being a mask, it actually shows his character.
I love the sensitiveness of it. You can feel the workings of his face underneath it.
It gives you this huge neck, you know, kind of like a panther, this real kind of feral look, you know, as you're going to pounce on somebody all the time.
I was just surprised at how intimidating he becomes and how much it changes him.
He really channels this other character.
When he's confronting an individual that he wants to take down, he kind of ceases to be human.
I swear to God.
Swear to me!
In the comic books, the cape flows, and you always see Batman crouch like a gargoyle on the edge of a building, and the cape kind of billows and drapes around him.
Chris really, really wanted the romanticness from the comics of the cloaks. So they had to be supple and they had to be able to take the wind.
We did prototype using actual velvet fabric.
One, go.
We got quickly bogged down because it got waterlogged and, you know, became sort of too heavy. So we invented our own fabric.
Which is the finest parachute silk, which is a nylon, so it's waterproof. And then flocked, which means you shoot little tiny hairs into it, so it ends up as if it's a velvet pile. So it's got the animal feeling on the outside and the waterproof nature and the lightweightness that it flies.
I was doing a lot of research with the Department of Defense, and there's something called memory fabric that they're experimenting with now. It's very soft and supple, but when an electrical current is applied to it, it can take on a rigid shape.
Preparing Batman Begins, I had wanted to redesign the technology of the suit completely, but we really didn't have time to be able to completely rethink the way in which the suit would be made. So in coming into the sequel, I really wanted to get Lindy to follow through that idea of, you know, building it from the ground up in a completely different way. We're using completely different technology.
We just set about redesigning the suit as a much airier, much more modern, much more subtle piece of equipment, like a suit of armor, instead of a rubber suit.
A lot of their ideas are based on high-tech sportswear, sort of motorcycle protection being one of the key things. Chris wanted to bring in this flexibility, so we developed armoured plates that would allow a sort of crumple zone between those armoured plates and allow him more movement.
Bruce is a highly evolved guy. He's made himself so, and he's constantly looking for innovative things and learning from his experiences as the Batman. He's evolved and realized that he needs to make some modifications and continually upgrade the suit. It had tremendous bulk, and it allowed him to be able to withstand bullets and knives and sharp instruments, but it lacked flexibility.
We took the reasons we had redesigned it, the increased flexibility, the speed, the maneuverability, all these things, and we put those into the story. We wanted to give, and I'd been looking for the story reasons for redesigning the suit, and then it occurred to me it's actually very simple. We just would have it be the real reason we did redesign it, which is he wants to be able to move faster and more flexibly. That's what we put into the story.
My armor carrying too much weight. Need to be faster. Bruce very much wanted to be able to see the movement of the head, which has actually never happened with any of the Batman movies. It's always been that he's had to move his shoulders to be able to see.
And on this film, we've achieved it by dividing the head cowl from the neck. So the suit comes up and the neck is part of that. And the neck is now not like those great big rubber pillars that went down either side. It's actually like a human neck shape now, but just all balanced together. Protection runs around the neck so that you can compress your vertebra and turn from side to side.
Chris and Lindy, they liked the sculpt of the cowl. That's exactly as it was before, although its profile is changed. And the cape remains the same because Chris always wanted it to be a very functional garment. As you know, Batman uses it to glide through the city.
Nice outfit.
You're just jealous because I'm a genuine freak and you have to wear a mask.
You might be right.
All the guys complain about their costumes, all right? That they're heavy, they're hot, and they are. They weigh over 50 pounds, and they're brutal to wear.
There's naturally, after 6 months of filming, a kind of a love-hate relationship with the thing, because you get headaches in that thing, you know? And I kind of say to myself, use it, you know? The guy's meant to be kind of fierce. When you get a headache, you feel fierce anyway, you know? You got no time for anybody, you're impatient. So I just said to myself, use it, you know, and I just put up with it, you know. This is a hell of an honor, really, getting to wear this.
The Batsuit's a little trickier. The problem is everything covers your ears are completely blocked and your eyesight is like that, and everything is up underneath your throat, and everything is about 2 sizes too small, you know.
You'd get by 3, 4, 5, 6 days a week, and you'd be working, you'd kind of be lost in your work, and you don't pay attention. Then one day, you kind of stop, and you kind of forget about what you're doing, and look around, and we all look at each other dressed, and it just seems ridiculous and silly and great fun.
It's not who I am underneath, but what I do that defines me.
He uses the cape and cowl to create a symbol that the people of Gotham will either respect or fear.
What the hell is that? What the hell are you?
A man who is just flesh and blood can be defeated, can be destroyed, whereas a symbol can transcend the idea of just being one man.